when Terry asked me to preach, I'm like, God, all right, if I have to preach, I want to do something like fire and brimstone. Let's get these people excited. I'm the girl that likes to go out and play paintball and beat people up, and I play Call of Duty. You know, like, I'm not that girl. I do hair, but whatever. And God's like, no, you're going to preach on love. And my heart conversation with God was really ridiculous because I know I have to do what God wants me to do, but I really fought it. And I'm like, God, I'm not married. I'm not even in a relationship. How do I know anything about love? And I'm like, Josh did a really good job last week talking about relationship with God. And he's married to Erin, and they're passionate about each other. So why do you need me to do that? And no, God won. So we're going to be in John 1 for 1 John for the most part of tonight. John's life, it revolved around love. He was saturated in God's love and in God's presence. He was called the apostle of love. He was the one who Jesus loved, and it's how he was identified in the Bible. So I assume he knew a little about what real love is, and I assume that he walked in it fully. 1 John is a phenomenal book directing us to the love of God. John was one of Jesus' closest friends. He was a leader in the Jerusalem church until the Romans burned Jerusalem down and all that survived there went into exile. He ended up in Ephesus, where he became an elder to all the Christians in that area. Ephesus was packed with all different religions, races. Religion was almost like buffet style there. It was a little of this, a little of that, you know, whatever suits your fancy. It was the new moon of religion. And for anyone that's watching this online, the new moon is our Chinese buffet in town. It's good. It's good. It's just a main course of Play-Doh with a side of Jesus. But Christianity teachings weren't very popular there anyways because Jesus taught strong ethics and values, and most of the area wanted to go willy-nilly with all their values out of the window. The early church father Jerome wrote a commentary on Galatians around 387, 388, and he wrote, "When the blessed evangelist John the Apostle had lived in Ephesus into his extreme old age and could hardly be carried into the meetings of the church by the disciples, and when in speaking he could no longer put together many words, he would not say anything else in the meetings but this, 'Little children, love one another.' When at last the disciples and brothers present got tired of hearing the same thing again and again, they said, 'Master, why do you keep saying the same thing?' John replied with a saying worthy of him, 'Because it's the Lord's command, and it is enough if it is really done.'" John's letters are a push to the Christians to keep Jesus, as he really was and is, at the center, and walk the way that he walked on the earth. John's letters show how beautifully and intricately intertwined God and love really are, and how that they can't be separated, and when we're walking in this true, full love, Jesus is kept at the center in pure and unadulterated form. When I was at the Prairie Fire Conference in Saskatoon, I was up at the altar one night during worship, and I was down on my knees. I could hear everything going on around me, but all of a sudden, I was bowing down, and I was just crying, "God, you are holy, you are holy." And all of a sudden, it was like I had been thrust into the throne room. It was phenomenal. Like, you guys have no idea. It was like God's presence was all around me, and I just knew that he was right there. And I couldn't do anything for the longest time except just cry out, "Oh my God, you are so holy." And my eyes were closed and my face was down and I couldn't do nothing. And after a while, I was able to open my eyes. And right before me was like this opaque vision of a throne with God sitting on it. He was so big and powerful. And all I could see was the bottom half. Like, it filled all of the church. And I mean, that's pretty high ceiling at Faith Alive. And I could see like where he was sitting, like waist down, hands on thing, and everything else was just clouds and smoke, and I was transfixed. I couldn't get over it. And the crazy thing is that no matter where I looked after that, that's all I could see. Like, after the conference, I left and I went to Kelowna for a family reunion, and that's all I could see. Like, everywhere I looked, I'd wake up and I'd look up and I'd see it, and I'd be walking and I'd look over and I'd see him, and he was just on his throne, majestic and glorious. And at the same time, I could see through this vision as well, because it was opaque. It wasn't like a solid vision, right? I was at this family reunion, and I was so overcome with God's longing for a relationship with his people, and his majesty and gloriousness, and all these emotions were flowing through me from being so close to him. And I'd just cry and cry, and Mom, you probably remember this. I was at nighttime, and I was just crying, and I was saying, like, why can't they feel this? And most of my family isn't saved, and so it was really, really hard, because like even when I walked in to the family reunion, they're like, oh my God, your face is glowing. And I was like, okay, but I could see God, like he was in everything right before me. I was a weepy mess that weekend, and I think that's how it's supposed to be. Not the weepy mess part, maybe, but when God's at the center of our focus, filling our 12 o'clock vision, everything and everyone we encounter can be seen through this God lens. And when we have God in front of us, we take on we're taking on the likeness of what we hang around and what we focus on. God becomes our treasure, and everything in our life hinges on this relationship with God as we become like him. It's something that we have to work at, getting rid of our fleshiness and being cloaked in God, but the good news is that it's completely doable. Colossians 3:1-14 in the Message version says that, so if you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, act like it. Pursue the things over which Christ presides. Don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with the things right in front of you. Look up and be alert to what is going on around Christ. That's where the action is. See things from God's perspective. Your old life is dead. Your new life, which is your real life, even though invisible to spectators, is with Christ in God. He is your life. When Christ, remember this is your real life, shows up again on this earth, you will show up too. The real you, the glorious you. Meanwhile, be content with obscurity like Christ. And that means killing off everything connected with the way of death. Sexual promiscuity, impurity, lust, doing whatever you feel like, whenever you feel like it, and grabbing whatever attracts your fancy. That's a life shaped by things and feelings instead of by God. It's because of this kind of thing that God is about to explode in anger. It wasn't long ago that you were doing all that stuff and not knowing any better, but you know better now, so make sure it's all gone for good. Bad temper, irritability, meanness, profanity, dirty talk. Don't lie to one another. You're done with that old life. It's like a filthy set of ill-fitting clothes you've stripped off and put in the fire. Now you're dressed in new wardrobe. Every item of your new way of life is custom made by the Creator with his label on it. All the old fashions are now obsolete. Words like Jewish and non-Jewish, religious, irreligious, insider and outsider, uncivilized and uncouth, slave and free mean nothing. From now on, everyone is defined by Christ, and everyone is included in Christ. So chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, and discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. It's just phenomenal, eh? I love how the Message puts it. There's so much in these 14 verses. I'm not going to rip it all apart, but I'm just going to hit on a few points and then move on. So, like I had said before, God becomes what we value, and life flows out of our relationship with God. Number 2, God becomes our focus, and everything is seen from his perspective. That's phenomenal. We actually get the mind of Christ, and I think that we gloss over that a lot. You know, when the mind of Christ, we're like, oh, we have this holy thought pattern or whatever, but it's literally his thought process flowing through us. Isn't that crazy? Number 3, we become like him. It's something that we sometimes have to work at, and sometimes he just gives us an instant transplant, getting rid of ourselves and becoming Christ-like. We take on his voice, his thoughts, his look, Like we just read in Colossians, our old life is shaped by things and feelings, and our new life is shaped by God. I remember when I first gave my life to God 3.5 years ago, He took away my potty mouth. You guys don't even know. I was doing hair in Moose Jaw, and I do a lot of men's haircuts because we did cheap men's haircuts, like $12 I think it was, or something like that. Anyways, so all these guys from the base and from the police station would come, and I would shock them with how foul I was. And, you know, they're young single guys that fly airplanes. You know, it's like Top Gun. You wouldn't expect them to be shocked by something that came out of a girl's mouth. Anyways, a couple of weeks after I gave my life to Christ, I looked at my boyfriend at the time and I was like, hey, I haven't sworn in a couple weeks. And he was silent for a little bit, and then he's like, you really haven't. And I didn't even notice at first. That was how much God just changed that part of me. It was like it had never been there. And that it's just so cool that God can do that, that, you know, He just takes it out and it's gone, and you don't even have to notice that it was there before. Sometimes we have to work at it, though. You know, there's a lot of stuff in my life that God's taken time to get rid of, and thank goodness He didn't reveal all that junk at once, because that would be scary. I just think of when I first moved back, and all of us young people pretty much moved back around the same time, and we went through a lot. I remember, you know, like one time I was over there, and I think Josh was praying about the statues of man and not bowing down to them anymore. And no one was praying for me. We were standing in a little circle and crushing these paper cut things. I don't know what was going on. I wasn't quite paying attention. And but all of a sudden, I'm like on the floor and looking up, and all those middle chairs were pushed back, and God took that out of me, I guess. And I'm glad that didn't happen the first time I came back to church. Fourth thing, labels are gone. I found it quite interesting as the writer of Colossians is describing what it means to have labels gone. I just noticed at 4 o'clock this morning as I was reading this again that it happens. That he throws in there the labels of religious and irreligious. If we worship or pray with our eyes open or closed, if we have our hands raised or our hearts lowered, what really matters is our passion, and not whether we are doing things the way people have always done them, or people say that it should be done now. It's our love displayed through our actions. That's the main thing right there. And number 5, love is what ties it all together. It's our basic all-purpose garment, as Colossians says. It's so important, and that's why John wrote 3 letters concerning love, and that love connects us as a people as well. So love connects us to God and one another. Really, these are primary Christian foundation values, or whatever. And all throughout the Bible, it's a general theme. You know, God saw that it was good. God loved what He created in the beginning. And in the new age, when the new heaven and earth are coming down, it's because He loves us and wants to restore us to His fullness. It's written all through the verses. You can see it in every single verse. God's love and His passion for us. Matthew 22:34-30 is the story of the rich young guy that asked Jesus what the most important law is. We all know the story, I'm pretty sure. It's a piece of biblical history that we've gone over a lot here in church, but we're going to read it anyways. Verse 34, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Him with the question, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments." Jesus gives this young guy a 2-for-1 answer, and that's just like God. He always gives us more than we want, need, or ask for when it's good for us, and whether we want it or not. He pushes us outside of our comfort zone. He tells this young guy, who by the way was a lawyer, he knew the law through and through, that the most important law is to love God with everything that you know how. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. I think that the real reason why Jesus gave the lawyer the 2-for-1 on this is because you can't have one without the other. They're intertwined and inseparable. He couldn't tell him that the greatest law was to love God because without telling him that he couldn't love his neighbor. Because if you love God with everything, you love your neighbor. And he couldn't tell him that the second most important commandment, and that's good enough, is to love your neighbor, because everything that you do your love for God has to be in it. 1 John 4:7-21 illustrates this perfectly. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This is how we know that we will live in him and he in us. He has given us of his Spirit, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them, and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. So real true love comes from God, connects us to God, and connects us to people. We can't say we really love others without knowing God's love, and we can't say we love God without loving others. And loving, you guys are going to get confused, and I'm really sorry. Loving others is to do the same thing that God did for us, to lay ourselves down for each other. And that's how we show God our love for him as well. When we lay ourselves down like that, God's Spirit makes his home in us and shines out of us and is made perfect in us. And because God is love, when love is made perfect in us, it means we become like Jesus, and we have the ability to walk as he walked on this earth. So we rely on this God love, and we become fearless because we don't have to be afraid of being so close to God, because he's forgiven us and made us righteous, and we walk in that righteousness. And the closer we are to him, the better we can love people. It's all connected. It's crazy, mind-boggling, simple, practical, all together. And if you guys didn't get that, I'm sorry, you'll have to watch it again later. My dear children, let's not talk about love. Let's practice real love. This is 1 John 3:18-24 in the Message. This is the only way that we will know we're living truly, living in God's reality. It's also the way to shut down debilitating self-criticism, even when there's something to it. For God is greater than our worried hearts and knows more about us than we do ourselves. And friends, once that's taken care of and we're no longer accusing or condemning ourselves, we're bold and free before God. We're able to stretch our hands out and receive what we ask for because we're doing what he said, doing what pleases him. Again, this is God's command, to believe in his personally named Son, Jesus Christ. He told us to love each other in line with the original command. As we keep his commands, we live deeply and surely in him, and he lives in us. And this is how we experience his deep and abiding presence in us by the Spirit he gave us. We're going to rip this part a little bit, just kind of verse by section. Verse 18 says, "My dear children, let's not just talk about love, let's practice real love." God's love is applicable and it's practical. It's not superfluous like the world's love. You don't fall into it, but it's something you grow. It's not something that you fall out of, but it's something that you work out. It doesn't have boundaries or conditions that say that the other has to act a certain way or say the right things. And thank goodness, because if it were, we'd all be hooped. And if we're being honest with ourselves, God usually doesn't respond the way that we want him to or expect him to anyways. So it wouldn't work well either way. So thank goodness real love isn't worldly love. And that's not to say that it doesn't have a high standard, because God's word says in 1 John 5:3, "For this is love for God, to obey his commands, and his commands are not burdensome." God holds the highest standard of living and the highest standard of love. But if we mess up, he sent his son Jesus to pay for it before we even did it. And all we have to do is own up to it, ask forgiveness for it, and leave it with him. This is the only way, verse 19, This is the only way that we'll know that we're truly living and living in God's reality. God's love is our measuring stick between us and his kingdom. It's really more like the wood that makes the fence dividing between the world and the kingdom. It cleanses us, it pushes us out of our comfort zone, and it motivates us beyond our own natural capabilities. Verses 20 to 22. It's also the way to shut down debilitating self-criticism, even when there's something to it. For God is greater than our worried hearts and knows more about us than we do ourselves. And friends, once that's taken care of and we're no longer accusing or condemning ourselves, we're bold and free before God. We're able to stretch our hands out and receive what we ask for because we're doing what he said, doing what pleases him. When we turn to God and he starts to transform us, his light reveals the darkness in our hearts as we fall in love with him, and his love starts to flow through us, and we become transformed into his image, and we get to live in freedom. As we lay down our will and our emotions, he transforms our spirit into the one that is able to walk as Jesus walked on this earth. And as we walk as Jesus walked on this earth, we carry the kingdom with us, just like he did, and there can be no darkness where we carry the kingdom. This transformation that we go through on our God walk puts us into a walk of righteousness, and because of that we get to be in communion with God and literally be in his presence. And because we're transformed into the likeness of Jesus, our thoughts become like his, our needs and wants mirror his own. So what we ask for is in line with what God wants to see on this earth, and we're able to receive it. That was something I struggled for a long time, because that verse, whatever you pray for, it'll be given to you. And I was like, yeah, but what if I want something that's ungodly, But it's right there, As we get transformed into Jesus's likeness, we aren't going to ask for anything that God won't grant. It's phenomenal. It just blows my mind. And again, verse 23, this is God's command to believe in his personally named Son, Jesus Christ. He told us to love each other in line with the original command. As we keep his commands, we live deeply and surely in him, and he lives in us. And this is how we experience his deep and abiding presence in us by the Spirit he gave us. I find it really cool that God just brought me to this passage, and he was telling me to speak on it, and it's exactly what you were preaching, like literally, like the same words, except it was Jesus speaking them a couple books before. 1 week ago. I honestly didn't plan it, just happened. God's command that what we're here on earth to do is to believe in Jesus, and loving each other just falls into that command. It's not a separate command, it just falls right underneath it. Jesus said it himself. And as we believe in Jesus, and we aren't talking about just speaking it like Josh said last week, because belief and action go hand in hand. We get closer to God, and everything we do is a part of who he is, and he lives in us and flows through us by the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. Love is the basis of our relationship with God. He loved us first and created us and gave us a free will to say no, but his heart's cry is that we say yes and continue to do so every moment. He wants us to fall madly, truly, deeply in love with him, the way that he loves us, with our eyes fixed on him and nothing else. He wants to fill our vision. He wants to fill our thoughts. He wants to fill our needs. He wants to be everything to us. And as we become more like Jesus, as we start to reflect him and mirror him, and as he starts to pour out of us, we really do. We learn to love everyone around us with this real love that is pouring out of us, and not with condition, like the world says that love acts, because our eyes are still fixed on him, and he's the lens that we see the world through. And like you said on Sunday, his favor is different, but his love is the same for everyone. He loves us all. And, we really do a good job of that at this church. You always have. When I first moved back here, you guys opened your arms wide without condition for the way I'd been living the last 5 years before that or whatnot. Even when I met you, Terry and Shelley, I said that right. It was backwards in my mind, Sherry and Telly. I walked into my parents' house and you guys were there, and I had no idea who you were, but you just came and gave me a hug and said you were so glad to meet me, and that's what made me really want to become a part of this community, become a part of this part of the body. You guys are so precious to me. I'm gonna miss you so much. You guys are my family. And I know we'll see each other lots, but it's gonna be really hard for me to say goodbye next week. So anyways, I'm gonna have the worship team come up and get ready, as I just have a little bit left. I love you guys. All right. Science has shown that when you get close to another person physically, that the magnetic fields of our heart react with one another. It's really cool. When you go and hug a person, your hearts actually react to each other, and your hearts start to beat in sync. When patients are getting a heart transplant, if they put the old and new heart beside each other on a table, the one that's faster or slower, the new one, it'll start to beat with the same beat as the old heart. Isn't that crazy? I can tell you guys something even crazier. A mother and her baby are so close that one look or even a smile can have their heartbeats thumping within milliseconds of each other. They don't even have to be touching. So my challenge for you guys in the new year is this: get close to the heartbeat of God. Dig deep into who God is. Find out what his love looks like, how he operates. Dig deep into the core of his being. Let God rip you open and do some surgery on you, because when he rips your heart out and gives you a new one, it's going to be beaten like his. Take on his likeness, his voice, and his thoughts. Reflect God, become like him, and draw so near to him that his bride starts to have the same heartbeat as him. Thanks, guys.